Hello to whoever's listening. Today I am going to be doing something different. I am going to be reviewing Onision's autobiography. Before we get into that though, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to help me out, like this video to boost up an algorithm, comment down below any suggestions for any video ideas, topics we cover, and I might make a video on it. Not guarantee though, because I am lazy, and also hit that bell so you get notifications to all of my videos. Anyways, let's get into this. I know I am very late on covering this autobiography, quote unquote. To be honest, I stayed up late watching a 3-hour review from this YouTuber called Elise also reviewing this, and I was like, man, I kind of want to do that. So now I'm doing this and writing script at 3 a.m. Also, shout out to Elise. I know she's a way bigger YouTuber than me, obviously, but I really do like her content. Anyways, let's jump into this. We start off this chapter with Craig stroking his own ego figuratively and probably literally, with him saying, for some time, I've wondered if I'm a highly capable writer or if I'm a silly fool aspiring to the impossible. I don't know, Greg, you tell me. I think you're neither. I think you're just some pedophile. Through high school, I was deemed a superior writer. Without request, I was recommended to advanced placement solely in the field of English literature by my teacher. By the way, Onision is in his late 30s, so him reminiscing and bragging about being a superior writer back in high school, which is like, what, 14 years old to 18 years old, is incredibly pathetic. I am curious though what his teacher considered good writing from the reviews and snippets I read of his previous novels. His writing is quite surface level, and I've seen 12-year-olds in AO3 write better stories. By the way, if this video does well, I actually might try and find his previous novels and review those too. Greg goes on to talk about how his teacher is convinced he looks like Joseph Stalin, and Greg agrees, saying how his teacher could have been Joseph Stalin's grandson. Like, cares? I didn't pirate these ramblings to read about possible reincarnation Joseph Stalin, but anyways, my previous books are infamous. There is no question or doubt that is exactly what they are. Infamy means to be known in a bad way. Nah, really, Greg? Really? I would have never f***ing guessed. He then goes on to explain how he's not a famous actor and stuff, but brings up his subscribers, which I cannot imagine have actually stayed throughout all the crazy stuff. Like, Onision isn't in his peak anymore. I get he has like, what, 5 million subscribers, I think. But like, how many of those people are actively watching him still? Lots of other YouTubers have discussed this section, but to summarize it and put it on screen, Greg uses a character called Timmy Jones to justify why you should throw around accusations, quote unquote, at Greg for being a rapist and pedophile by calling us all car thieves, stating that is right. By reading this, you are now all accused car thieves. See how easy that was? Accusations are often nonsense when they lack proof, unless you disagree. But why would I care if you disagree? You're filthier car thief after all. Laughs. As you can see, this is incredibly ridiculous. You can't point at the reader of your book who might actually be a fan and call them out for a nonsensical crime to disregard your own accusations that people have come out of the woodworks over the years to claim. Giving evidence and talking about their experiences with you. For example, forcing one of your partners to be cummed in multiple times after she explicitly told you not to, but then gave in. Or maybe when one of your other ex-girlfriends has come out to say he wants to get an ugly tan, dye her hair bright green, and get a tattoo saying, I'm a liar, as punishment. That is extremely abusive and predatory, but yes, Greg, accuse a potential fan of car thievery because he wants to make up some stupid and subtly, quote unquote, say all things he have been accused of are false/ridiculous.
But anyways,
Economy. Greg describes how ginormous his head is. If this is true, which I doubt quite a lot considering Onion Boy fibs a lot, then he should have been aborted, which he even admits would make all of the normal people extremely happy. And Onision goes on to say that his head, oh my god, was 15 inches, I think wide, which just could not be fucking possible unless he had, oh, I don't even know how to say this word, hydrocephalus at birth, which is like a brain defect that can be caused by some sort of illness. I don't really know how to say these words. Or he had macrocephaly, which can cause developmental delays and neurological defects. Either way, if this is true, it's most likely that Onision is mentally deficient, which did not surprise anyone, but that really stood out to me when I was reading this. I was like, no fucking way. I had to look into this. I was researching why can a baby have a 15-inch wide heads? And these came up. Then Onision talks about his dad wanting him to be circumcised or modified, quote unquote, as he calls it, then describes how circumcision works. I'm personally against circumcision. I believe you should be the one to decide that when you're an adult, even if it's religious purposes. But Grug just uses it as an excuse to dunk on other people's religious beliefs and basically describes a baby as a science project. Grug goes into talk about preschool, for example, getting pissed on by a boy as a kid and finding an adult magazine and describing how he thought vaginas were an open wound, saying, I flipped page after page and saw woman after woman spreading the lips of her crotch to reveal what I could only assume was a horrifyingly dangerous wound. I get it. He was a kid at the time, but I can imagine him still having a very incorrect assumptions about vaginas. He seems like the type of guy to think a woman is unclean if she doesn't shove soap up her pussy, which obviously you shouldn't do. The vagina is self-cleaning, just wash it with water and stuff like that. Besides the vaginas and pissing, Greg goes on to talk about drinking powdered milk for some reason, stating that and the powdered milk my mum used to insist I drink instead of real milk due to how poor we were. I remember the chunks of unmixed milk. Oh, what terrible taste. I've heard in a lot of reviews and reading in this book, Greg loves to flip-flop on whether or not his childhood was great or how horrible it was. I guess it depends whether or not he wants to be seen as amazing in one page and a victim in the next. This is just more of a mild example. Greg goes on to talk about being abused by his mother, by being beaten, by retelling an experience he had when he mistakenly destroyed a car, and later that night his mum punished him, stating a leather belt. She was beating me with a belt for smashing up the car's windows and mirrors, which is absolutely horrendous. Obviously you shouldn't beat your kids, but Greg uses it as a way to show off how empathetic he is by talking about how he was sad that his mum was sad. No, Greg, being viciously beaten by your mother and being sad about it does not make you a good person. Instead, it has most definitely stunted you emotionally. But you know what? You won't get help with that, obviously. Furthermore, Greg credits his mother not teaching him emotional regulation after he starts to beat the out of another boy for being kind of annoying to a girl he liked, saying, I was a maniac and my mum taught me exactly how to be that way. There's more boring stuff I'm going to gloss it over now. The PDF is easily findable. I found the PDF personally on starts with Greg bragging about his views and other boring like getting cuts in himself and going to school. Although he then goes on to talk about Mexican kids in his schools who are forming gangs and blames the parents for it by saying that the type of parents you'd have to wind up a killer in the 4th grade level. I'd rather avoid meeting that level of crazy. I have to assume Greg is completely unaware of how insane of a parent he is. For example, and I'm going to be using this example a lot in this video, his daughter fell out of a window, and when he found out, he started recording to prove he wasn't responsible, failing to realise that the fact that his daughter could do this in the first place is very neglectful. Why the f*** weren't you supervising her? Oh, also, fun fact, Greg has admitted that he wouldn't talk to his children when they were babies because they couldn't talk and didn't really see a point in engaging in conversation. Once again, failing to realise kids learn how to speak mainly by their parents. And by the way, he has admitted this. He has admitted to this. Oh my god. Besides Greg's negligence, apparently he had a Mexican girlfriend in the 4th grade, and this boy and his gang were going to fight with knives until the boy had a crush on his girlfriend. The story isn't as action-packed as it sounds because Greg just doesn't go to the fight, and then he talks about a parody song he wrote in the first PlayStation. At this point, I'm only a few pages in, and I'm bored as we have 140, 150 pages or so of pure bore to get through. So yeah, consider fucking subscribing. Honestly, this chapter isn't particularly interesting except for this passage, which I want to discuss and highlight. When I turned 13, I was much bigger than my sister. We're talking 5'10" versus 5'5", 160 pounds versus 330 pounds. The middle sister has disconnected my internet so she could call her boyfriend. She did so knowing I was doing important work. to me on the computer. We had dialed up and one phone line. That did not matter to her. She pulled the plug after I warned her not to, so I tackled her. I'm not sure if any blows were thrown, but it was the last time my sister would ever mess with me. The days of her beating me up were over. In that moment, something strange and familiar happened. My middle sister became a super fan of me. Do you remember the boy I beat up in 2nd grade? He became a great friend after I put him in his place. Now my sister was doing it as well. It was as if to make people be civilized and nice to me, I had to slap some sense into them. It was like some nonsense where animals fight each other to find out who the alpha is. Then they suck up to the alpha from that point on. Many humans are like that, still prisoner to their animal inclinations. Greg discusses tackling his sister because she presumably interrupted his work of writing up stupid shit on Cultivate. She's incredibly basic. Before I get into like more important stuff, I just want to say Greg is not 5'10". That's all. That's all I'm saying. He keeps talking about how tall he is, but a lot of people have theorized he's around 5'6" or 5'7", which is below average. So I'm not too sure why Greg, if this is true, lies about being like an inch taller than average. Like Greg, people are gonna notice whether or not you're 5'10" or 5'6". That's a pretty big difference. Anyways, but Greg goes on to theorize that if he beats shit out of people, they will start to respect him, and chalks up to quote-unquote animalistic inclinations. He doesn't seem to take into consideration that these people, aka his middle sister and the random boy he beat up, A, didn't want to get kicked out of them again, because Grug clearly has anger issues, or B, were extremely scared of what he can do. No one wants to with someone who is so clearly troubled that he would go into fits of rage over stupid. Furthermore, I don't think he realizes how bad this makes him look. Admitting he thinks someone beating them will make them respect him. I dread to imagine the full extent of how he treats his children, because Greg has basically admitted he does indeed, or has, severely neglected them. Onion Boy later in this chapter goes on to describe how quite freaky it is that his sister can interact with people like a normal, well-adjusted person, and seems to believe it is an act and not, considering she might be more sane than he is. Grug states, my sister freaked me out with how she interacted with others. It was as if she was always on the stage, blathering on about the wonders of snake oil, working the crowd as best as humanly possible. I felt like under that fake cheer was a person terrified to her core. As you can see, Greg cannot grasp how someone can genuinely just be happy and not have it be performative. Like how Greg is often manipulating people and therefore putting on a performance. I believe he really likes to make anything and everything deep and morbid to seem incredibly intellectual and poetic, but instead he comes off as nicely as I can put it, fucking idiot. In my opinion, I feel like this autobiography so far really does show how unaware Greg really is about other people, truly believing that being violent is the only way to keep people in check, despite him later going on to say, sometimes when you grow up, you realize violence solves nothing. It is a great lesson. After describing how people need to be beaten up sometimes to become civilized and also thinking nice, genuine people are either extremely tortured souls or secretly super manipulative, just like him. Oh my god, holy shit, my jaw hurts so much. I'm going to disclose right now this chapter that this is the chapter where Greg gets groomed by a 15-year-old girl when he's 11 and basically defends it. I'll put a timestamp on the screen so you can skip not to hear this, but I feel it is important to cover this anyways, despite how disgusting it is. Greg tells us about this girl who is associated with the church that Greg's dad goes to and talks about. I'm talking about the girl who stared at me intensely, smiled at me constantly whenever she saw me. Well, that summer we spent a lot of time together. We never dated, but things were heating up since my height had exploded, and I began to tower over her despite her being my senior. The summers before we did a lot together. This isn't too important, but Greg has a very intense interest in his height, despite allegedly being, 1 or 2 inches over average, at a underwhelming 5 foot and 10 inches. With the way he bigs himself up, I would hope he's over 6'5", but that's beside the point. I just wanted to point out. Anyways, I love this girl who is 4 years older because I'm naturally attracted to those with the opposite gender as me. Unlike the other girls my age, she actually was already fully developed. This, for a young boy like me, was awesome. I loved how she looked at me with her eyes so intensely it felt like she was shooting energy right through me. I loved how she laughed at most everything I said, and clearly she liked hanging out with me. She had long curly brown hair which was obviously Latin and smelled awesome. Greg, despite being over 30 at this point, while writing this, is unfortunately haven't realised he was indeed groomed. Often groomers will spend lots of time with their victims and make them feel incredibly special. In this case, laughing at whatever Greg said, clearly showing how much he loved spending time with them. He talks about how natural his feelings are for this, which in all fairness, most kids around his age do fancy older people. But Greg clearly doesn't seem to realise that these older people should not whatsoever reciprocate these feelings, because this is pedophilia, and Greg is talking about being in love with the pedophile. Greg recounts the story, stating, as he went up to shower, the girl was infatuated and said, "I'm going to shower first. You can join me if you like." In that moment, I wanted to interrupt into a "yes, please," as the tension had been building up all day, but she quickly said joking before I could react at all. I was bummed. Honestly, reading this game with chills is incredibly gross. Even if she was quote-unquote kidding, which I doubt even at 15 or even now, at my age, aka 17, when writing this, I wouldn't jokingly ask an 11-year-old to shower with me. But unfortunately, it gets far worse. Greg continues to say, it didn't take long for her to slide over to me and began kissing me. At first, it started kissing from the sides, but she eventually slid on top of me. For me, this was without question the best moment of my life up to this point. I was not only kissing back, but I was sticking my tongue in her mouth and touching her everywhere she was touching me. Anyway, unfortunately, I can't get into too much depth about what happened, because you have to remember, I was an 11-year-old boy. I don't want to freak people out too bad, / it feels weird to talk about it. So maybe we'll save my more intense experiences for periods in which I was much older. The point is, she and I went to third base together. The next day we went to third base again, the front room's downstairs. That is if I understand the braces correctly. Yes. Greg has just fondly recounted being assaulted by a girl older than him. Some other pedophiles out there might be like, but she's 15, she's not an adult. And while yes, that is true, they are both minors, the morality of it is absolutely ghastly. Greg is still a child, not even a young teenager, while Greg's groomer can qualify for plenty of jobs, is in high school, and qualify for college in 3 years, can drive in a year. I really shouldn't have to tell you why this is so disgusting. The age gap, oh my god, I don't even describe it, like the mental, age and stuff, because 11 and 14 are such big leaps in development. I hope whoever is watching this is smart enough to realise how disgusting the situation is. Greg even acknowledges how wrong this is by saying it can freak people out, and he feels quite weird recounting it. In this situation, he is not at fault, but he defends it, which is incredibly dangerous, because for the majority of his career, his audience has been young teenagers who could be groomed without even realizing it. Before we move on to the next chapter, I found this one tidbit that really stuck out to me. It's him describing his teacher. That year, I had some strange teachers. One teacher was obsessed with Steve Jobs and Apple computers. His weird quirk was one of his shoes had a couple of inches lift on it because his body was just simply disproportionate. He had grey hair, almost white, and he was very pale in skin tone, just an average old computer nerd. Greg, I don't think this teacher has a quirk. The guy is, just disabled. I have no clue what Greg considers a quirk, but I would consider a quirk as, an unconventional personality trait, not goddamn disability. Next time someone asks about my autism, I'm just calling my quirk as if I'm just some My Hero Academia character or some shit. Greg later, I don't know if I've included this, but Greg does talk about his fondness for anime, and one of them is My Hero Academia, so maybe that's involved somehow. I'm not too sure. Greg talked about being some Morgoth/rocker kid, and listing off all the bands he likes, such as Rob Zombie, Nine Inch Nails, Moby, A Perfect Circle, Limp Bizkit, and then goes and talks about his disdain for emo kids, which really amused me as an emo guy myself, saying, I was a Grand Theft Auto 3 obsessed, metal-loving, baggy jeans wearing rocker kid. If you don't know what a rocker is, they were essentially like emo kids without the ridiculous makeup, and instead of wanting to harm ourselves, we were fantasized about being badass all the time. And we didn't do the bangs over my eyes thing. We loved having crazy hair, spiked, pulled back onto the sides, but never all sad or girly looking. I convinced her to say that most any dude with dyed black hair who wears makeup in a serious context would probably be a bottom in any romantic relationship. Zero alpha male energy from those guys. I don't think Greg realizes that the peak of his career was lumped in with other emo guy YouTubers due to his appearance and his emo haircut. I'm not too sure why he is being so elitist, especially during the periods emo kids and Morgoth/rocker kids were both seen as like posers. Greg calls emo guys bottoms and have zero alpha male energy, but then goes to describe emo boys having perfectly brushed silky hair of your typical emo bottom boys. I'm not homophobic or anything, but Greg, that sounds incredibly gay. He then describes his gross rocker hair, snore, I don't know. Greg later goes on to talk about kissing a quote-unquote ebony goddess, his words, not mine, very odd choice of words, and talks about how terrible it is, saying, "It was the worst kiss I ever experienced my entire life. She pucks up her lips so tight, almost to make a donut shape. When she pressed her lips against mine, there was so much muscle being flexed in her lips that it didn't feel like she was trying to kiss me, it felt like she was trying to punch me in the face with her lips. Additionally, did in fact leave a hole in the middle, which she tried to stick her tongue through, like she was an ocean creature. Dude, do I have to explain more? It was horrifying. Although, yeah, it is a kind of an odd way to kiss. That could have been a first kiss, and not everyone's perfect first try. Also, Greg, why are you talking about kissing in the 8th grade? You're like 30 whatever, I don't know. I cannot imagine being Kai, aka Greg's partner, and just reading this over him, recounting basically every single kiss he's ever had. Ever. What an odd scenario to think about. Greg continues to go on and on about how this girl has something wrong with her because kissing is like magical tongue dancing. And if you don't do it right the first time, you're the biggest weirdo ever. Like, Greg, you're 13 or 14, whatever in the scenario, if I know my grades right. You get better over time. Anyways, Greg goes on saying how massive his dick is because everyone thinks he's hard when he's not. I only had an issue people think I had a boner when I didn't, specifically when I'll do pull-ups. Multiple girls would interchangeably look at my shorts and say, "Do you have a boner?" I would always feel compelled to correct them by saying, "No, that's just how I looked." I asked Jaden Dawson once about this problem. He said that he had the same problem. Apparently, according to him, our business just rests differently, making it look bigger under clothing, when in reality, not big at all. Just more prominently displayed. Hey, I didn't design my body, I just live in it. Pretty sure Shane and I are definitely of average or slightly above average. Nothing to write home about. Yes, Greg, nothing to write home about. That's why you keep talking about your dick. Thankfully, I've not seen Onision's dick, but lots of people compare it to like a baby carrot. And I found this Reddit comment stating, oh, I don't have the original comment, but this is what I've wrote, so it includes how many years ago this was and what the username is. I made a horrible decision and sacrificed my sanity for your amusement. I'll describe the 4 pictures. Number 1, his ass looked like the moon, with fucking acne on it, and it is completely flat. Number 2, his dick looks like a thumb. Number 3, he basically has no balls. They're probably 1 inch in circumference. Number 4, I want to kill myself. That is so eloquently put. Squilliam, tortellini. I also want to kill myself, but because I'm reading this the day I see Onision's dick is the day I hang myself. Greg rambles on about his sister being a fan of his and describing heavily in detail about the school's appearance and garden and other. Can you tell I'm already bored? Despite Greg stating later in the bit that some things in here aren't meant to be entertaining, if he titles chapters about pregnancy scares, people want to read about pregnancy scares, not boring stuff. I think that's obvious. Even if you're like the biggest fan of Onision, I cannot imagine genuinely reading this entire autobiography and being engaged with it the entire time. I'm on page 52 right now, and I just feel as if I've read a whole novel, which is not a good thing. Greg goes on to talk about dating some goth girl for a few weeks, which weird as basically writes about every relationship he had at 14. He states, I asked out this 5'7", 119 or so pounds it face girl because that's what I was expected to do. We dated for a couple weeks and it was great. I started to warm up to her and the acne started to disappear in my mind the more I got to know her. Greg has a really weird thing about acne. I believe in his autobiography he does describe having really bad back acne. And it was really gross. Yes, he has intense back acne and even addresses hypocrisy, but still excuses it by saying hers is a lot more intense than him and it would be easier to see her if she only has acne on her back. I honestly believe Greg exaggerates everything, so I can imagine this girl maybe having, I don't know, a few spots, but in Greg's mind that is the equivalent to like cystic acne. Nothing wrong with having cystic acne, you can't help that, but I imagine Greg seeing them as equivalents because he is so shallow. Greg goes on to prove my point on how shallow it is by admitting, I got on the school bus one day and the guys who lived near me wanted to see who my girlfriend was. I pointed her out to them, and a dude who ironically had acne on his cheek said, dude, she's ugly. If you want a realistic image of what she looked like, without having to see her yourself. She basically looked like the ginger girl from Stranger Things, only with tons of pimples. Do you see that visual now? Fact of the matter is, she wasn't actually ugly, it's just mean. People like me. Couldn't get past the zits till we actually got to know her. So now that the guys who lived near me weighed in, saying she was ugly, what did I do? Bro, I literally broke up with her. So some random guy says your girlfriend's ugly despite the fact earlier you claimed that you're soulmates and all this even though you're married with children and also in your 30s, so you broke up with her. He tries to justify it by bringing up the fact that she f***ed a guy while they're broken up for a week. Like, you're broken up. She has no obligations to wait around for you to date her again. She can f*** whoever she wants within reason. They go out again. Then he breaks up with her 7 times. Not even kidding. Due to the fact that she smokes cigs and weed, and he's being all dramatic over it, saying stuff like, she had a serious problem with weed and cigarettes. Pretty sure I dumped her a total of 7 times throughout our relationship due to the fact that, yeah, I wanted her to stop smoking everything, and she refused. There were other breakups, but the bulk of them revolved around her addiction to drugs. I'm not too sure why he's framing this as if she was using heroin or whatever, but that's what this reads as. Since they are in 9th grade, they're like 14 or 15 or whatever, so yeah. Too young to be smoking cigarettes and weed, but I doubt Greg is this empathetic that he cares about her health. He's just mad that she won't quit something just because he asked, and therefore isn't letting him control her. Anyways, they f***ed behind a Mormon church, which is pretty funny, I gotta admit. The girl accused Greg of not being a virgin because he's so good at f***ing, even though it stated she's the one topping. I get it, you're not really lying there emotionlessly, you do some of the work too, but I can't imagine Greg being absolutely amazing at everything, especially sex, that he was accused of not being an actual virgin. Greg admits later going fingers deep inside this girl while at a convenience store late at night. Like, Greg, what the f*** are you on about? Why would you even agree to that if this isn't like bullshit? If my girlfriend asked me to finger her in the middle of a shop late at night, I'd be like, what? Oh my god. This chapter's title's complete bullshit, by the way. Greg was an idiot and didn't shave properly, so he thought the ingrown hairs were herpes. And the goth girl thought she was pregnant because they didn't use condoms, and her period didn't start. Instead, it just happened a few hours later after the call. While scripting this, I realise it is way too tedious because I'm covering almost every chapter. There is definitely things to criticise Greg on just by skimming through this, but if I had to criticise Greg every time he says something stupid or gross, we'll be here all fucking day. Greg hates emos, but he has the most emo chapter names. That could be a Heartthrow Heights song name. Greg gets with a girl who showers, which is a big plus. And he wants her to hang out for the weekend or whatever. I don't even know. I don't even know, honestly. But he has to cancel the thing because his dad and stepmom want to go on a road trip. Greg has a big strop, just like he does with everything. Like, if he's not in control of everything, he's just gonna throw a fit. Greg's dad is mad because he was listening to 9 Inch Nails, because I guess it has anti-religious lyrics, and Greg's dad is religious since he goes to church and stuff. They continue to squabble until Greg's dad pulls over and chokes him, and sadly, it doesn't snap his neck. I feel like that would be a very good way to end this. Then Greg died. Greg continues to warn his dad while being choked that he will fight back. I don't know how hard his dad is choking him, it's not really specified, but I can't imagine him making any coherent sentence while being choked. For example, I'm going to demonstrate now trying to speak while choking myself. See, you can't say anything. And yes, I actually did choke myself. That hurt. I don't know if the microphone's gonna pick that up, but it was just me like spitting everywhere. Ow. Don't do that. Don't choke yourself like that. They fight and Greg gets arrested while he's sobbing. Sorry, I can't get over what I just did. That's not in the script, by the way. He compares his dad not defending him to the fact that his dad allegedly molested multiple people, which aren't equivalents. Greg being arrested for self-defense, quote unquote, which I'm stretching out, but if this is the honest truth, then yeah, I guess you can classify it as such because his dad blamed the situation on him. Entirely, it's not comparable to his dad being an alleged sexual assaulter and getting away with it, so I'm not too sure why he's bringing this up. Greg tries to prove his dad is a big, massive lie because his dad said the incident happened while Greg was 17, but in reality, Greg was 15. All this proves is Greg was 15 in the situation and nothing else. Like, I feel like most dads get their kids' ages wrong. My dad still thinks I'm like in year 10, in my second year of college. Greg goes to juvie for the weekend and is so constipated, probably from the stress, he pulls out his manually. I wish I was kidding, but no, Greg on record has written, eventually, because I was so frustrated that I could not get my bowels to work, probably from the stress, I just put my finger up there and I pulled it out manually. See? Honest. Painfully self-deprecatingly honest. I'll get made fun of forever for admitting this, but I don't care. Thank you, Greg, for telling us about the time you put your fingers up your own arse. Did it feel good? Probably did, but you wouldn't admit that or else you'd become a BMO bottom boy or whatever. The cell obviously smells like because he just shoved his fingers up his own arsehole. And people are rightfully horrified while Greg is probably giggling to himself in the corner while sniffing his brown finger. Greg goes on to talking more about juvie, change the channel, and talks about his kids being restrained in a chair by guards who is the kid's mum. I don't know. Greg acts sympathetic just as Uncle the woman doing her job. Although yes, some people do need mental help, not jail time / juvie. It's most likely the kid did need to be there, so I'm not too sure why Greg is acting so high mighty. Also, it's the same guy who lets kid fall out of a window, which I might add. Come Monday morning, Greg is set free though and put on house arrest. His dad becomes really strict and called the police because Greg didn't want to eat dinner. And the police actually showed up and threatened to arrest him. If this isn't I really don't know what to believe. I assume his dad is becoming abusive, because if this is real, that is Greg almost has self-awareness when talking about his dad seeing his PlayStation by saying, some parents treat their kids like property. They think, oh, maybe if I'm a huge arsehole to my kid, they'll magically fall in line and be exactly how I want them to be. Wrong, idiot. You need to operate in a way that allows your kids to see you. 1, give a shit about them. 2, what is best for them. 3, are fair and reasonable. 4, have your own life together and therefore should be a natural example to follow. Kids that run around yelling at other kids. Kids that go hitting other kids. Kids that are nuts. It isn't hard to figure out why their parents suck ass. It's almost always the case. If you want to find out why kids being look no further than the place they came from. Parents should always take the blame. Greg wrote this out with, I assume, no irony. Greg has shown he doesn't care about his kids. Clearly doesn't care what is best for them, considering he is neglectful. Greg is not a very fair and reasonable man if you go off his previous wives and ex-girlfriend's statements of him being abusive. His life is not together. Maybe at some point in his peak when he had a nice house and money coming through. We are well past that now. And his life altogether is incredibly unstable. I guarantee you, if his kids grow up shitty, Greg wouldn't take the blame due to his narcissism, and I can't imagine Kai will take responsibility either. I dread to imagine what his kids will have to say in a few years when they can speak out against their parents. Also, I didn't add this to the script, but I just realised Greg is talking about how kids that are very violent and, I don't know, I guess misbehaving, it's always the parents' fault. They always need to be disciplined, but has Greg not considered kids with mental problem, not mental problems, but I mean I don't know, possible mental illness or disabilities, for example, an autistic kid, a really autistic kid, can often shout at other people, be quite violent, and that's not really the parents' fault. That's kind of how the kid just operates. Greg hasn't taken that into consideration. I don't know if I could word this better. There's definitely people out there that can word my point way better and more professionally, but anyways, Greg goes on to talk about his issues with his dad some more. If this is all true, then I can see why Greg would end up so fucked up in the head. But that's still not an excuse for his actions, even if he claims it is. And if you skip to total 2 chapters because it's all samey of Greg dating girls and not seeing the irony in his statements. Apparently Greg had a best friend he forgot to mention until 104 pages into his 147-page autobiography. This guy basically kept Greg company whenever he wasn't dating girls. He emphasizes how awesome his friend is and how he'll remember him as awesome, except when he didn't remember him at all. Greg and the unnamed best friend made comedy sketches on the VHS because Greg is old and greying and wrinkly. Best friend thinks Greg's music is shit, and he's right, because even now with his latest songs being posted a few years ago, they sounded like shit, so I can't imagine what Onision made at 16. Greg goes on to talk about anime he likes, like Full Metal Alchemist, Death Note, My Hero Academia, and Bleach. Although I have only watched My Hero Academia and Death Note, I can't imagine Greg fully grasping the stuff in Death Note, like the symbolism and the ideologies, but it probably appealed to him because it's about death. And Grug is a gothic teen, even at 30 whatever. Despite Onision being some big-brained, edgy atheist, his friend becomes a missionary in Japan and Brazil. Greg, friend he is, ignores the letters his friend sent, and when he finally tries to contact the friend again, the friend's mum picks up the phone and tells him the friend died ages ago due to a blood condition in Brazil. Greg dwells on the passing of his friend, rambling about, I was actually surprised when she would say something so nice to me. I felt bad about not writing to my friend back when he wrote me. Obviously, I could have been a much better friend. If I could go back, I'd probably just tell him to stick around and inform about his condition early, because I guess I'm a time traveler in this scenario, and hang out the rest of his life so I can be a big part of it. In this context, the mum said Greg was always a good friend to this guy, despite ignoring his fucking letters until he died. He laughs as a good person some more, fantasizing about being a knockoff Doctor Who, and pretends to act as if he isn't aware how shit of a friend he is. Onision obviously not grasping the concept of suicidal people or mental health issues, despite his depressive disorder talks about. The future is one of the biggest reasons I don't end my life. What comes next? The movie's coming out, the game's coming out, new technology, the family that needs me. Reasons to live on. Although these are valid reasons to not kill yourself, I don't think Greg fully understands how heavy these suicidal thoughts can be. Most suicidal and depressed people are in so much despair that they simply don't have the strength to push on even despite all the shit being released. Onision seems like one of those guys who thinks suicide is selfish, and if there's evidence contradicting my theory, I will gladly accept I am wrong. Onion Boy goes on describing a bully he has in the military, saying this guy was really insulting, but it's okay because the guy was hot. He states, another person I lost, which was more of a bully than a friend, I was later work with in the military. I thought he was so handsome. I'm talking about a guy that's around my height, 5 feet and 11 inches. He had tan skin, black hair, and big muscles. He kind of looked like a Pacific Islander, but more handsome than any you've probably thinking of. His hair was slicked to the side, nice and short, just like a real professional would have. This enemy, I guess we'll say, was hilarious in my opinion. It got posted onto the job together a couple times, and all this guy would do is insult me. We're talking 9 to 11 hours a day, driving around at Tinker Air Force Base in a big blue van, roasting me. He'll tell me how dumb I am, how useless I am, how lame and incapable he thought it was. Stuff like that, my reaction, I was ear to ear smiling. Whenever I got, because his insults were said in a way that was funny. It was like Comedy Central roast with this guy. He was smart, one of the most handsome guys I ever saw. And yes, maybe I found him funny because he was hot, whatever. Is this just like what military guys in America do all day besides fight? Like muck around in big vans? It wouldn't surprise me, but regardless, Greg loves describing how attractive and fit this guy is, while this military man insults him all day. Is Greg secretly an emo bottom boy who likes to be degraded? That wouldn't surprise me either. Military man dies in a motorcycle accident, and Greg brings up his dad, lending his motorcycle to a random woman, but then she dies because she wasn't given a helmet. Bit random to put in here, but okay man. Onision then goes to talk about all the times he's nearly died. Then goes on to talk about how accidents just happen and people hate helicopter parents, but hate people who also just don't look after their kids by saying, oh my god, my throat, ow. People make fun of helicopter parents, then they say everything's your fault at the moment you're not a helicopter parent. Sometimes horrible things happen. If I would condemn all those people, I would lose my humanity to the fact that only an idiot or a robot thinks parents can be perfect and all-seeing / all-known beings. I personally think Greg interjected this in to take off the heat of his own negligence. It's very in character for him to do so. He clearly doesn't understand nuance because you don't have to be a helicopter parent to look after your kids. Just supervise them a bit more without sheltering and restricting them from doing shit most kids do. Maybe it's easier said than done considering I don't have kids, but I can't imagine it's incredibly hard to keep your kids alive if they're a healthy, able child and you supervise them when it's needed. Before we move on to another chapter, Greg goes on to talk about smacking his head on concrete as a child, and all this shit is making me believe Onision has some sort of head injury or multiple that will just never look. Greg has a plumbing apprentice thing, but then he goes into the US Air Force instead and talks about this crying boy, comparing to him as a small child, and says, I went up to this guy, squatting down next to him and asked him what was wrong. I had my locker set up early and had some time to spare. No one else was helping him. And I just felt like having a dude around crying wasn't a good look or vibe to our flight. Someone should show that they actually want to take care of their fellow airmen. Tonight that was me. The little blonde-haired, pale-skinned boy was bawling about how he had never been yelled at before. He talked about wanting to go home already, and how deeply the training instructors had hurted him with their loud, angry words. He communicated this between gasps of air and moans of sadness. Yeah, I guess Guy is being kind of dramatic if this is, like, true. I have a feeling that it wasn't just because the guy just wanted to go home. Like some training instructors can like break the rules. They probably done something to the guy that made him this upset. But anyways, I'm pretty sure people who worked with Greg in the military have come out and said he allegedly threw tantrums and cried all the time because he couldn't handle the pressure. Even if this isn't true, Greg has obviously crumbled under the pressure by stating he had a mental breakdown, which, because according to the life of Onion Wikipedia, he refused to clean up posts a senior airman told him to clean after Lieutenant Colonel told him not to. No normal individual coping with military life would do this. He stripped completely naked in the Chief Master Surgeon's office. He said he did it because he was a human being and not a robot. No matter how hard the blonde boy cried and moaned, I don't think that is as pathetic and bad as Greg stripping naked in his boss's office to try to get discharged. Funnily enough, it didn't even work. The Wikipedia also stated he made a song against the military to get discharged, allegedly refused to kill a rabbit because he didn't want to kill things, including people, which is ironic considering the whole point of the military is killing like other people, as to put it as, I don't know, simple as possible. I don't know how Greg signed up for the military and went through training despite being this stupid. And last of all, talks about being depressed and medical professionals and putting a gun to his head. I'm not going to touch up on the last bit because I'm not a professional and there are people out there that are far more intelligent and educated on the topic than I am. But I don't need a professional to dunk on Onision's stupidity, especially about the alleged rabbit thing. I say alleged because lots of people believe Greg is straight up lying about the whole rabbit story to seem morally right. What Greg fails to realize is that it sounds incredibly unbelievable and ironic, considering if he refused to even kill a rabbit and refused to kill people, then there's not much in being in the military, especially since he wasn't even being put into being a medical professional or mechanic. And he's still attempting to sound more morally superior and better than everyone else has made him sound like a fucking idiot. Sadly, this isn't an isolated incident, because Greg is just an idiot. Anyways, I skipped another 2 chapters, I think, because it's just more military stuff. I'm so happy we're at the end, finally. At the time recording this, I am past the hour mark. I've only written like 20 or so pages, despite the autobiography being 147 pages, but trust me, I only include the semi-interesting stuff, or stuff I can criticize to be entertaining. Onision wraps up the whole thing, only going up to age 19, despite the fact that writing this, he is in his 30s. Wonder why that can be. Maybe there's some people out there that don't want him to talk about his 20s and how he abused shit ton of women. Anyways, this is 8 or so pages of boring, fake, deep shit, but to summarize, all celebrities are just selling you shit and are stupid and bad people, and then tries to give surface level advice. Like, for example, lesson 1, don't trust anyone. People will try to convince you that they're supportive of you, that they love you, and want what is best for you, which is fine if they're genuine, but almost no one is. In reality, if you ever piss them off, you may find quickly that they only cared about themselves, and now they have everything to gain by destroying you, especially money, because you're famous and major companies love paying people to shit on celebrities. I'm not even a big time celebrity and people get paid tens of thousands of dollars to go after me. Fucking horrifying watching people who once said they will never hurt you do exactly that for cash, all because you refuse to condone their horrible deeds. I assume this is people speaking out about Onision in the documentary made about him. He is definitely seething and frothing at the mouth writing all this down. Greg also tells us 2 life lessons, which are common sense to most and hard to grasp for idiots like him. I've skipped quite a few lessons because they're stupid. Lesson 6, continue to live like you're poor. When you get money, don't go spending it. Most celebrities make this mistake. I made this mistake. Almost everyone seems to make this mistake. I spent my money taking care of other people. I bought my mum a house. I would literally pay for numerous people to eat, travel, have shelter, and so forth. Most of those people aren't in my life anymore, other than my mum and dear ones. Lesson 7. Have a professional handle your finances. I've seen multiple celebrities make a stupendous mistake of not having an expert handle all their money-related issues. There are numerous services out there that are really cheap and could help you save thousands, even millions if that rich. Not financial advice, by the way, officially. Are these lessons incredibly ironic? Yes. They are. Greg tries to make his financial situation sound much more selfless than it is. Even if he has done all these things, must we forget the fact, best summarized by Emperor Henry on r/Onision 3 years ago, has stated, number 1, tax evasion, tax frauds, and ignoring the IRS debt. By the way, it is quite known that Onision has committed tax evasion and frauds and all this shit. Anyways, he tried to deduct his marriage, his divorce, his wedding rings, his 2 big mansions, his at least 2 Tesla cars, toilet paper, all of his electronic equipment used for making videos, his game consoles, the solar panels and battery pack on at least one of those big mansions, as well as every other random piece of crap to use in a video. I highly doubt he's ever started paying that debt off. If he continues ignoring it for long enough, he'll go to jail. It is well known Greg is quite money driven, so I can see why he would try to attempt this, but honestly, it's still really funny that Greg has even tried to deduct toilet paper, his consoles and his Tesla cars as some sort of necessity for his videos, if I am understanding this correctly. These aren't business expenses, Greg, especially not your divorce, which I almost forgot to bring up as well, but he tried to deduct his fucking divorce. Oh my god. I don't know if my voice is getting louder, but Jesus. Greg pats himself on the back for a hypothetical person out there saving himself because of him spewing common sense, and talks about how he would cover getting married, further discussing his depression, his suicide attempt in Korea. But it's obvious to us he's too lazy to cover any of that, and pads out this autobiography more, even if it would make a more interesting read than instead of the girls he dated as a kid. Thank you for sticking around till the end. My apologies for putting through all this. What is the conclusion of this exactly? Well, I think it reads like a piece of shit. I have discussed how boring the stories are itself, since he either tells them boringly, drags out random shit for too long. It was just stuff no one realistically cares to read, but I unfortunately had to read all of it. My overall thoughts is incredibly disorganized. He often jumps from periods of his life. For example, him talking about his military bully dying before he actually discusses going to the military, and what is like, which makes this autobiography very confusing with regards to the timeline. Sometimes I have to look back and be like, oh, okay, this is when that happened, and I don't feel like readers should have to do that. Other than the confusing timelines, Greg's writing style, quote unquote, aka shitting up random memories he has, is incredibly apparent. Instead of jumping into the point of his chapter titles, which would be far more engaging, he meanders on. I assume it's to set up the story itself, could really take out all the boring backstory, quote unquote, and nothing would change. I took out all the boring backstory stuff, and the stories read the exact same, and get an idea of the Onision timeline without having to read every single little detail like I had to. Not to mention even the stylistic choice of giving chapters names instead of numbering them is incredibly weird. Some books do pull this off very well, and it makes it more intriguing, like, oh, what's gonna happen here? Oh, this is gonna happen according to the chapter, you know? But since Greg over dramatizes everything, I don't even know if that's a word, you feel like quite cheated out of an interesting story, i.e. Greg saying the doctor suggested he died, or simply his mum was recommended to have an abortion because Greg has an abnormally sized head. Furthermore, Greg pads out more boring bits like scenery and accusations towards family members, but then still fails to reach the 200-page mark like most basic autobiographies reaches. I've read children's books more longer than this. For example, Matilda by Roald Dahl, which is 240 pages. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, again, by Roald Dahl, which is 176 pages. The BFG by Roald Dahl, 199 pages. Witches by Roald Dahl, 208 pages. James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, 176 pages. I could go on all day about literal children's books that are longer, and for some reason they're all fucking Roald Dahl. I don't know what it's about. By the way, I'm not a professional writer or anything like that. This is just my opinion. There are many things flawed with this book and Greg as a person, but I don't want to spend several hours criticizing every single problem. So instead, I'll just go into my main 3 points on how to improve this autobiography, even just by a little bit. Onision obviously won't take my advice and probably won't see this video, so it's more for any inspiring authors or someone just wanting to write an autobiography. I've literally just stated I'm not professional. I'm just disclosing that. I'm just someone who passed my English GCSEs. Number 1, as I've stated, Greg just goes on and on about random shit before telling us the actual story that the chapter is named after. My theory is either Greg is so narcissistic he thinks we'll care about all this, or Greg simply was just struggling to hit over 100 pages if he took out all the unnecessary details. I can't imagine this autobiography even hitting the 50-page mark, but that's a rough estimation. Number 2, either just number the chapters like a normal person or name the chapters less, what's the word, melodramatically. Greg is a very melodramatic person naturally, so I think numbering the pages would be his best bet. Not much else to say about this. And number 3, last but not least, you don't need to put every single boring memory in this autobiography, even if it is just to pad it out. For someone who doesn't remember his childhood well, you talk a shit ton about it. You stopped at age 19, you could have discussed more about your YouTube career, marriage, like any other non-illegal adult experiences you've had, and I feel like any fans left of Onision would want to read that, to read his mindset when he was still doing YouTube and the skits, and when he had tons of money. I feel like I would be more inclined to read that. Those are my criticisms on how to format the autobiography better and to make it less like clunky and boring. My apologies if this video isn't particularly good, especially in this format of scripting and more research. It's my first video like this, and I just wanted to cover something I thought would be very digestible. If people want me to cover more Onision stuff, perhaps his books, like his previous books, I will give what the people want. I'm like Grug. This is quite an anticlimactic end, but this is the end of the video now, and I have nothing else to add that I haven't said. Thank you very much for sticking around. Consider subscribing and doing all the other stuff I said at the beginning. I hope to see you around again, and goodbye.